Well, hello and welcome. This is the February PKI Solutions webinar. If you joined us in January, you may have noticed that while Jake and I were sitting in the same room and able to kind of chat a little bit, we are back to our usual different parts of the country. But welcome to the February webinar for PKI Solutions. We're going to be talking about PKI-as-a-Service, and this is something that is near and dear to Jake. It was his idea for the month. In case you haven't joined us before, I'm Mark Cooper. I'm the founder and CEO of PKI Solutions. Jake, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Mark. I'm Jake Granlenard. I'm the distinguished architect here at PKI Solutions. So worked with Mark for a long time and PKI for even longer. So I think we just real quick as we've shifted and gone along with these webinars, hopefully everyone is enjoying the progression here. But I've tried to bring these in more of what I'm seeing a lot of right then and there. So trying to be a little bit more responsive in our webinar. So that's kind of the genesis for this one today is what I'm seeing and reading a lot of.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we will try to get to questions as we go through the topics today. So if you haven't already joined the chat, you're welcome to kind of post a hello, let us know where you're connecting from. If you have questions, someone in our team will help moderate those over to the Q&A side, and we'll get to those as we go through. And as Jake said, from the topic standpoint, we are trying to go back to our technical roots here. I just found out what our March one is. I'll save the surprise until the end, but is very timely, but a little bit of small world when it comes to some previous stuff that we've contributed with. All right, well, let's dig in and take a look. So we're gonna start off by just kind of talking about PKI-as-a-Service. It is a little bit of a broad definition. There are different types of PKIs that we'll touch on here. We'll talk about some pros and cons just in general from this kind of an approach. And then we'll kind of talk about some of the real world issues that we've seen with customers in their own words, issues that we've helped them troubleshoot, some things that we're seeing out in the industry that are driving these things. And if we still have outstanding Q&A, we'll make sure we get to it at that point. So why don't we start with PKIs? So Jake, when you're talking with our customers and they ask the question, what is PKI-as-a-Service, manage PKI? Where do you typically take this conversation?
Well, straight off, kind of like the top there is a long time ago when cloud was the thing. Everyone said cloud, and it became synonymous with pretty much it was all encompassing. But now that we're all living in the world we know it's not, right? We're in a hybrid state, or some people are all cloud, but there's still a lot of things that go with it. So when clients ask me about it, or on sales calls or things like that, are we talking like a fully hosted? Are we talking just utilizing a portion of something to fit a need? A quick example that would be Microsoft's Cloud PKI, which is fairly specific in what it's meant to do, which was a little confusing to some, actually a lot of us. So that's what I always start there, is trying to get more to the point of what we are actually talking about and make sure that, so as we go forward and have these conversations, it is what we are basically talking the same thing.
Yeah. And I know when I talk to customers, there's a few different directions this goes, right? There is the PKI that is embedded in some cloud provider and you're just buying a certificate. You go to AWS, you go to Azure, and hey, I need a certificate, and something just gets spit out and it's AWS CA 16. That's not really your PKI. You're just getting a certificate that someone has kind of stood. But it's technically PKI-as-a-Service. You don't own it. You're just kind of getting it. I may even argue it's more of an a la carte certificate approach. And then there's the hybrid style that we might call, which is a public provider like a DigiCert or Global Sign, or somebody has a route that is already publicly trusted, but they'll stand up a portion of a PKI underneath it that's dedicated just to you. So, a public CA number one, and then underneath it, Contoso issuing CA, and you're the only one requesting certificates off of it. And it's kind of this quasi publicly trusted but privately issued sort of things that has its own pros and cons. And then there's even versions of that where managed providers have a private CA. So some of the CLM providers, identity providers will have, a private CA that they've created, and then they set up subordinates underneath for each customer. And when you kind of start pulling that apart, that's a little concerning as you start thinking about, hey, if I'm a subordinate and some other company's a subordinate, someone's going to have to do great lengths to prevent us from trusting each other.
Right.
It goes back to the root. Yep. And then we have the fully hosted, right? Someone else is standing up a root and policy CAs and HSMs and all the bits and pieces, right? So these are all different models that customers can come across. And imagine we may have even seen some others as we kind of start thinking about some of these identity providers that are like PKI and like PKI. I would imagine those come up as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been dealing with that with a client, and trying to go to some great lengths to control our own destiny of owning our CA yet hosted somewhere else, and jump through those hoops. And we want to make sure, some clients really want to make sure they own as much as they can, and others aren't concerned with it. But we still need to be mindful of does it meet our standards, how it's being run, who's taking care of it.
And I think probably the reason that there's increasing popularity, or at least interest, right? There's at least questions around it. And I don't necessarily know, I would say it's increasing. It's just kind of constantly there is what is it, and does it solve my problems? Because I think more and more of IT is used to, hey, how do I get out of my data center? How can I put it up there? Why can't I just go by the Microsoft Cloud PKI, right? It's got the word PKI in there. Why can't I just do that?
Right.
And it starts these conversations of, okay, what are you really trying to achieve? What do you think it is? And I think if I had to make a gross simplification, most of our customers are expecting a PKI that is as functional as they have on premises today, but somebody else is magically sitting in a room and pushing the buttons and making it work, but they get all the control and all the value that they had before without having to have the subject matter experts or the dollars or the right? And it never quite does all of those things in one, does it?
No, it doesn't. And that's kind of why I want, this topic is kind of coming up right now, is with all the changes that we have going on in our field right now, with post quantum and the CAB forum and all of these things. It's I think it's causing a lot of businesses to figure out how, what's our path forward. And I just want to make sure everyone knows what they are going toward if they make that decision.
Yeah, and there's certainly cases where these work really well for certain scenarios. I setting up a small subsidiary, there's no IT staff, I need something there, there's no infrastructure, there's no data center, I can compartmentalize my 2 or 3 use cases, and I need it not on a public PKI chain. Great, maybe the managed PKI is the perfect way to go there. Or what my needs are really do align with one of these managed providers or identity providers, and it works great. I think it's really making sure it is what you expect. Right? Can you peel back the layers and figure out, just because it says PKI, just because it says it's in the cloud, doesn't mean it's going to fit everything that you're trying to achieve. Exactly. And that's kind of where the pros and cons come in, right? There are, like any decision that you have, there's pros and cons to these things. So why don't we take the positive side of these things? What are some of the pros that come up in conversations with customers of objectives that they're trying to achieve, or maybe our customers that have kind of augmented their PKIs by implementing some managed solutions? What are some of the positive things that they see?
I think the biggest thing that comes up is either someone has or organization has just had a rough audit, and they're looking to maybe move to the cloud where things are a little more not their responsibility. So I see that one, and then the other part is if they have an environment exist already and it's older. We have a lot of PKI compatriots that are retiring or getting out of the business, and they're not sure where they're going to go. Look at that. So it's a way of
side of things.
Exactly. Yeah. Continue. Everyone they know they need that service and that functionality, but they just don't know if they can maintain that on premise any longer, and it provides a solution.
Yeah, the ability to say, hey, I have a smaller footprint. I have fewer servers in a data center. I've gone from on-prem HSMs to somebody else's HSMs or cloud HSMs. Right. So there's the ability to check a box and say, hey, I have less things sitting in a room somewhere. They're definitely there.
Right.
Do we dare tread on whether cost is a pro or a con yet? Let's stay on the positive side. Do you have anything positive to say from a cost perspective when it comes to PKI as a service over a traditional on-prem kind of an approach?
Mostly in that instead of writing a giant check up front, you get to spread that out. But in the end, I think you're going to end up paying a little more. But you avoid that giant hit up front, and that would be, I think, a positive for some companies, organizations.
Okay. Yeah, there's a silver lining. Okay, rather than a big check up front, it's just big checks every month. I think I would probably take exception to a little bit more over time. We've got some scenarios where we'll see
positive there. It's significant.
Okay. All right. So we can. I guess the other thing is we could say generally you're moving a lot of costs from CapEx to OpEx, right? So instead of going out buying a lot of capital equipment, that big check, now we're moving to OpEx. I think an interesting thing, at least from my perspective, is I talk to more customers that are constantly running out of their OpEx budget because they're spending it on software and subscriptions and Azure and all those other bits and pieces. And they're usually like, well, I got CapEx left. So anything positive to say around SMEs? Like, do we hear great feedback from these managed providers that they're getting great subject matter support and product support when they're over there? What's been that feedback?
No, this is the area where, and again, our background and something that I when I first came to work with Mark all those years ago, something I always really admired and appreciated was we'll never tell a client what they should do. I'll tell you about everything. And this is one of the areas where I'm trying to stay positive, but it's been my experience from our clients that have gone. A lot of times the resources running these hosted PKIs, they're not SMEs.
Yeah.
By a good bit. So not to say they can't learn eventually, but from what I've seen, it is issuing the certificates. But ask a question about adding a new extension to a certificate template, or it's tough. It's really tough.
I think that's a good point, right? It's not just, is there somebody who's pressing a key to kind of keep a server running or changing something in the UI. I think a lot of what we talk about when we talk about subject matter expertise is are we getting certificate properly protected from a cryptographic standpoint? My new business use case that comes in that needs a certificate, how are we going to map that across? How do I implement monitoring tools and visibility tools? So that's not really provided from a PKI as a service, right? It really is the software is kept running. It's
Yes.
really up to you to have it. So I think a lot of the expertise that we've seen teams need for on-premise PKIs are the same skills that they need when it's a managed or PKI as a service. Somebody's still having to be that certificate SME on those things. They're just not the ones that are patching the server or updating the OS. But guess what? The majority of the time, the cyber teams weren't doing that. Somebody else kind of owned that on-prem equipment.
Right.
So
And I would say
really addressed this.
What we've seen at times is even more so in that some of the things we get with the on-prem PKI, and obviously we focus primarily around ADCS, but and so much of the industry has. So vendors, I think at times write guidelines assuming that you need this type of certificate. I'll just say domain controller. When you try to explain sometimes to a third party to create a domain controller certificate from scratch, it actually requires more of a SME to do that. So that's been what we've seen, and sometimes it's still a struggle. Yeah.
Well, we've kind of started going on to the con side. You know, we talked about
I don't know my goal here, but
it's right. We started talking a little bit about the cost. There's definitely, you know, a much higher cost to these things. That like anything, if you're not operating something, you're paying someone else a profit to operate it for you. Like if we just take it at that very basic. No, I think one of the other areas that we kind of keep running into is really some of the real world problems that we see, right? So there's the general pros and cons of going up there, not going up there, and any organization can kind of take those arguments and think about, okay, do they align with our objectives? I think where things kind of start getting interesting is when we kind of start seeing some of the real world issues. And before this webinar, I had brought up like an interesting, I think they're dealing with their PKI, have seen the changes in the CAB forum. And CAB forum is kind of controlling public PKI, the stuff that goes on the web servers. And we've seen things like validity periods change. We've seen validation requirements change, all good things. Now, that is trying to solve certain problems in the public PKI trust perspective of, hey, if I have a shorter lived certificate, then errors that we make in issuing out certificates aren't as impactful, et cetera. But the most recent one, for instance, around the mutual TLS. So I know this topic has come up. Now you can't get client authentication, EKU, in certificates from these providers. Right. I think what this illustrates in this particular case is whenever you're dealing with somebody else's PKI, whether it's a public PKI that is governed by the CAB forum or a PKI as a service or a managed PKI, you would probably be very surprised on what you can and cannot do with what you think is your PKI.
Right.
So the earlier scenario I talked about where maybe it's a public CA that has stood up some infrastructure underneath you. Well, those providers that do that, guess what? They can't let you do anything on a subordinate CA that their root isn't allowed to do. And those roots are a lot of times are locked down to certain types of EKU. So if you do things like, hey, I have a managed PKI, here's a big use case that comes up. I want to do TLS inspection, all of that outbound stuff that Palo Alto and everyone else has been doing for years. Well, you need a subordinate CA certificate to do that. Right. These managed providers are never going to give you a subordinate CA certificate because suddenly you can start creating certificates that can't charge you for it. But the mutual TLS is a great example of there's an exterior body that may choose, hey, we don't want to allow code signing anymore on our managed PKIs. And in 6 months from now, we're going to stop doing that. If you're a business that moved to this managed PKI thinking, hey, I just don't have to have the infrastructure and now somebody else has got the heartache, if you will, running this, you're now very much subject to their business decisions on what they do and what they don't want to do with PKI, right?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And we see this and working with clients that the sub CA, or as we call it, basically a certificate issuer. So it's not really meeting our requirements as a full CA for that, TLS inspection. Sometimes it's hard to get, and we don't. And I guess I fall back to the last slide is even if it is allowed, if someone's going to be there to say you should limit the scope of what that certificate issuer can do. So it can't do another sub CA. So those are all the things. Even if you can do it, it's good to have something there that will kind of keep you safe from yourself at times. If you don't realize, oh, I made a mistake. That's part of what I'm seeing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when organizations look at this, simply some of those early check boxes, right? Did I get it off my premises? Did I get it in the cloud? My objectives are met. It's managed by somebody else. There isn't always the thinking of, okay, I've now handed over the control of my identity issuance system to somebody else. And you brought up a scenario just before this about, great, we have a PKI, we're not getting squeezed by EKUs, but are they really as secure as we think they are? And you kind of brought up a story around the authentication that was being used to get certificates.
Yeah, with this rapid rise in so many different organizations now acting as hosted CAs, most of the big public CAs have an offering. A lot of the certificate lifecycle managers, the big ones, have an offering, and it's something that it doesn't come out of the gates fully baked at times. There's a maturing process, just like everything, and I think it's optimistic at times what is being sold and maybe truly what it is. So you're going with.
I think the scenario that you had shared was just, to get a certificate, people were just getting a link. They'll click here to get a certificate sort of thing, and whoever had the link kind of thing. So it's run by some company, and it issues out certificates that look like PKI certificates, but it's based on a piece of email that was sent that somebody happened to have the URL and got access to. I think, like we all know now that, we don't trust two-factor email as a way of kind of signing into the things. It's too easily compromised. The fact that I have an identities whose trust foundation is just who was able to click a link, again, doesn't show up necessarily in any of the bits and pieces when organizations start looking at these managed PKIs. I know one of the other things that we saw from customers that was a surprise is one customer had talked about they have an on-premise PKI, but they had stood up a managed PKI for a portion of the environment, and trying to follow best practices. They worked with the vendor, and that PKI had cloud HSMs backing it. Great. Like, if I have a PKI, the keys are still vulnerable somewhere. Does the vendor have access to them? No, great. Let's make sure that they're in a cloud HSM. So everything looked great until one day the cloud HSM vendor was doing maintenance. I believe it was maintenance. And the HSM was scheduled to be down. So, of course, their PKI was affected. Well, the managed PKI vendor never bothered to tell their customers or didn't subscribe to the maintenance notifications to tell their customers, hey, your PKI is going to be affected because these cloud HSMs are going to be down. So this customer was suddenly thrown into an outage because they assumed, hey, I'm buying a service from this company. And that company was like, we don't really own the HSM. We just sold it. That's not our response. It was just kind of a funny little positional thing. I guess in my mind, it would be kind of like a managed PKI vendor going, well, it was a power outage and we don't manage the power. It wasn't our responsibility to let you know that our data center was going to be down because the power was out. It's like, no, I'm buying a service from you. If something's going to affect your ability to deliver the service, it's your responsibility to let me know. But just another example of just because it's in the cloud, just because it's a PKI, doesn't mean these problems go away, right?
Exactly. It's another tier.
It just winds up being a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we get these scenarios where being in the cloud kind of introduces its own set of challenges and new issues. There are scenarios that we've seen customers going to and coming back from
Mm-hmm.
PKI as a service, right, Jake?
Yeah, and
What have been some of those leading things that they've said caused them to move away?
Accidental overages. Most of the hosted solutions have a way or kind of a link to emulate like auto enroll. And someone accidentally puts authenticated user on a template, and suddenly you've issued 20,000 certs you didn't think you were going to, and those are per certificate. So that was one of the areas. But one of the things that we've seen now with a couple of clients that as they've come out of a managed PKI was as they started to come out, all the certificates, even if you had just enrolled for a new certificate and it was valid for a year, as soon as you end the contract with that managed PKI, your certificates are revoked. They don't live on. So there's a hard stop there. And that was as troubling as anything for our clients.
Yeah, it's a very, very brutal ending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very much so.
Yeah, and we've seen a few that have kind of dealt with, hey, we've got to transition to a new PKI. The contract's over, and they're like, no, if it's going to take you another month, you got to buy another year. So looking at the time, why don't we get to a couple of questions here? So Rivo is asking Microsoft Cloud PKI, are they in transit to a full functional PKI? So I think Rivo wants to know, are we expecting Microsoft to stand up a full PKI, because that Microsoft Cloud PKI, it's really Intune PKI is really all it is in client authentication. What are your thoughts? Do you think that we'll see a Microsoft Cloud delivered PKI?
I don't think they will go all the way based on the amount of time it's been. The most recent change, if anyone hasn't seen it, was a couple months ago. They opened it up and removed the additional charges. So there's no additional cost if you have a certain level of license. I think E5 or higher or something.
Yeah.
There's no additional charge per user for that. But in the webinars I've seen and everything I've read, I don't know if the appetite is there to own the whole PKI. This is a niche for them. It fits what they're doing, and it is nice at times to not have to deal with maybe NDES or some of the other things. Have a solution for that, but I don't see them going all in on it.
I think that the revenue is a good indicator. That the Intune Cloud PKI helps drive Intune, right? And that helps drive sales of E5. Standing up a fully functional PKI doesn't really drive revenue anywhere, unless maybe they put it into the Azure services side. So I'm not seeing indication, so I'm not holding my breath there. The other question I see here is around assurance levels. Now, what's the assurance level of a managed PKI? Now, going back to the URL link, some of them very low. I think that's probably an overlooked question quite a bit of how many organizations are really talking to these vendors and saying, okay, great, you tell me you're going to do this PKI or you've got to manage PKI. Tell me what the assurance levels. How are we going to actually ensure the identities of devices and users that are getting into there? What are your thoughts around assurance? Do you think that there's examples that we've seen that are as good or better than organizations running their own PKI and setting that as their own standard?
No, I don't believe so. I think primarily the question I see our clients interested in most is uptime. I think that takes top billing and not so much the assurance level. I think it's assumed, and it's a dangerous assumption.
Yeah. If the primary measure of something that is secure is it up, that's fine for a door. I want to make sure the door is in place and it's upright, but I don't think anyone measures, is my firewall or my antivirus working simply because, is it up and running? There's a whole lot more bits and pieces because you can have a lot of holes in things that are up and running.
Right.
The other one I saw here was the reduction of certificate lifespan. So the question around how does this fit in there? And I think for this one, the certificate lifespan, this is a public CA thing. This is CAD form driven. We've had too many CAs that have done bad things and are reducing lifetimes. When we kind of talk about these managed PKIs and PKIs-as-a-Service, this is more of private PKI inside my organization that is not constrained by these lifetimes. So we're not seeing the lifetimes get shorter because cryptographically they're insecure. It's because the assurance level. There's too many organizations that are selling public certificates that are failing to do a basic level of validation. So if we make the certs shorter, I think what the CAD forum has realized is there's no ability to force the revocation of known fraudulent certificates. You could go to a provider that is proven, and Google and Apple and others have kind of had to kick some of these providers out of their root program when they sought examples, and the providers wouldn't revoke the certificates. And everyone's like, hey, we know the rules say this. We've showed you how this is. You're refusing to do something about it. Well, because the lifetimes, they can last for a couple of years. This is all about reducing those. I know we get a lot of questions. People go, oh, I'm scared about reduced lifetimes. What am I going to do internally? And usually the number one thing we say is it's not going to affect you internally.
Yeah, it doesn't apply to internal or our private PKIs.
Yeah. The exception to this maybe is those managed PKIs that are tied to a public route. I've come across some of these providers that will sell certificates into organizations that really just hang off of one of their public routes that could be considered in a root program and somehow constrained, but doesn't happen often. But it may also be customers that have been historically buying certificates from public CAs because it was cheaper, easier, faster, whatever, and they weren't using something in-house. They are going to have to go find something else. So mutual TLS is going away, shorter lifetimes are going away. Getting these types of enterprise certificates from public CAs are going to be very difficult going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other experiences that we've seen that you want to share?
No, really, just more so that making that leap is either way. Just know what you're getting into. For our clients, and we talk to clients, and there are some clients that it absolutely makes sense for, but there are some that it doesn't. And do your homework.
Yeah, there you go. I like to do the homework. There's probably tough questions to ask that are there. It probably fits in for some hybrid strategies or some specific scenarios that are there. But at the end of the day, make sure that the motives are right. Am I doing this because it's cheaper? It's just not in my data center. It's more secure. It's less secure. It's newer. It's fancier. It's got more acronyms, or it's got the word AI or PQC or something there, right? What are the motives at the end of the day? And then what is your organization really trying to do? We kind of think of these things from a pragmatic standpoint of what do you really need to do? What risks? Because managed PKI, HSMs, policies, procedures, software, all of these things are mitigation tools. And you really just have to decide, what are we concerned about? What are we trying to solve? Because you can't do them all. You can't do all the tools. You can't do all the security things. So you'll wind up with systems that are so secure you can't function.
Right. The business has to run, and that
business has
find
to run.
A secure way to get there as close as we can and still make the business functional.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, I teased at the top of the webinar that we have an interesting topic next month. Jake, what do you want to say about next month's topic?
So we're getting a lot of questions and talk around the MTLS, losing that ability from our public CAs, and then also something that I actually wasn't even that familiar with, another type of certificate that's out there, that an X9, and I had to look it up, and I wasn't even aware of it, and they come to find out, your experience with it. So we even heard some vendors are saying, oh, this might be a good thing to use. So
Yeah.
maybe not, but Mark,
Yeah.
you can tell. I didn't know how involved you had been with that whole process.
Yeah, it was interesting. So the X9 is part of the financial services industry, and I was part of the working group that created the certificate practices for a new PKI, and the PKI was designed a lot like we've seen for the federal bridges and organizations at the federal level needing to be able to collaborate over PKIs. In the financial space, there was a need for a PKI for financial services, whether that's ATM or bank-to-bank transactions, that was separate from the CAB form because of things like increasing lifetime. So I was involved about a year and a half ago, and it was just kind of interesting that in the end they wound up putting it out to bid, and DigiCert was selected to operate the PKI. Now, it's not a DigiCert public CA. It is another private managed PKI intended for the financial services industry. But I think because it has the DigiCert association to it, we are seeing some vendors say, oh, why don't you go get a mutual TLS certificate from the X9? It's another private PKI, not intended for use outside of the financial services space. And again, there's probably some specific use cases that are there, but we may also start seeing denials in the future. But we're going to talk about what this is. We'll talk about X9, talk a little bit about the history, what we're finding, and why we're starting to see customers asking about mutual TLS from that. So thank you for joining us for the February webinar. We will make a copy, as always, on our YouTube channel. You may have noticed a recent rebranding of that, but all of our past webinars are there. If there's any questions we didn't get to, we'll be going through the chat, make sure that we follow up where we can. And if you have any questions around managed PKI or PKI-as-a-Service, don't hesitate to reach out. Jake, any parting words?
No, do your homework.
Do your homework. There we go. I love it.
We're here to help if we can.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thank you for showing up this month. We'll see you in March, and we look forward to talking with you then. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.